All right. So just to start, if you'll all just go down the line and introduce yourselves and explain to the audience what you do for either the Institute for Faith and Freedom or the Grove City Journal of Law and Public Policy.
My name is Jacob Pfizer. I am a student research fellow for the Institute for Faith and Freedom and the executive content editor for the Journal of Law and Public Policy.
I'm Isaac Willauer. I'm the senior editor of the Grove City Journal of Law and Public Policy.
I'm Corey Kendig, and I am a marketing fellow with the Institute for Faith and Freedom.
I'm Ben Chamberlain, and I'm also a marketing fellow with the Institute for Faith and Freedom.
And again, I'm Grace Riley, and I'm also a marketing fellow. So just going down the line, starting from Jacob, can you tell the audience a bit about what specific projects you work on with your respective roles?
So for the Institute, I'm attached to the visiting scholar, Dr. Joseph LeConte, who does research in historical media and is currently writing a book on C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, on their literary works, on their biographies, and putting them in their sort of historical context and focusing on their faith and how it motivated their work. And for the Law Journal, as the executive content editor, I get the first round of edits for any prospective articles that are sent in to the journal. I make sure that it meets our quality. I make sure that the argument is logical and coherent and that their sources are accurate. And overall, I just try and make sure, is this a publishable academic piece of literature?
Yeah, so with the Law Journal, essentially, I deal with it on the other end. So he gets the first look. I essentially get the last look before the journal goes to publication. Normally, when you think about a law journal, you think about, Harvard, something in the Ivies. Grove City has one, too. It's one of the few undergraduate faculty-partnered law journals in the country. So essentially what I do is on the publishing side, we enforce deadlines, that kind of thing. And then also there's things involved in like writing the preface, that kind of thing. So we basically give the journal, from the time Pfizer looks at it, I give it the last look before it hits publication.
As a marketing fellow, I do some odd projects. This CPAC, I went to DC. I went to CPAC, but my main goal in going down to DC was to interview alumni and interviewing them as what they're doing now in DC. I went to Heritage, the Leadership Institute, and we even had a familiar face from maybe some of you, Libby Krieger. She was down at CPAC. She came and I interviewed her as well. So just seeing what they're up to now that they're out in the workforce and showing, what the Institute has really done for them in the professional world. I also have taken on a project that we're kicking to next year, being a libertarian versus conservative debate between the econ and the poli-sci department. So.
Yeah, so I do kind of a lot of the same thing with the marketing fellows. I write a lot actually for Checkpoint and help with the organization for Checkpoint News, which is our fellow college student publication for news. You can find it at IFF.com. I'm working on an event coming up next week, which is a screening of Calvin Coolidge. It's a documentary about him. And then prior to that, we have a series on YouTube, which is the Meet the Fellow series, and I was one of the co-hosts along with Maya, who isn't here today.
Yeah, so, and I'm realizing too, we didn't explain well enough probably what the overview of the Institute is, but for the Institute for Faith and Freedom, there are marketing, research, and outreach fellows. So students have the opportunity to work for the Institute, and then for the Law Journal, similarly, students all work on that. And my work encompasses the podcast that the Institute does, and also the Meet the Scholars series, and some other marketing events. But just moving forward from this, I'll start with Ben and Corey as marketing fellows. What has been the most impactful part of being a part of the Institute for Faith and Freedom for you? And do you have any favorite events that you've been involved with?
I think one of the most impactful things, or one of the things I take away most from the Institute, is actually it gives a lot of us, the students that are fellows, we get to practice great leadership skills. We get to plan, run, and basically run all the events. Like a lot of what you see today is mainly been done largely by Grace, actually. This was her event. And so these events that we get to help organize and run. One of my favorite events actually is the Reagan Lecture Series, where my favorite specifically was last year when Bill Barr came and we got to come and listen and hear him speak.
Yeah, similarly along those lines, like I talked about the CPAC trip. I got to plan the entire interview process, who we were interviewing, and got to ask a lot of the questions from questions that I had drawn up. So it's really just something that if you have a passion project and you want to work on it, you get to really dive into it and take the leadership, take the accountability, and really focus on what you want to do and make it sort of an individualized experience.
Yeah, and for Isaac and Jake, I know Jacob is also a fellow, so you can speak on that as well, but just explain to the same effect what's been most impactful or helped you to grow as a student as being a part of the Law Journal.
Yeah, so I'm a journalist by trade, so normally when I think about publishing, I think about it in the sense of covering the news, pretty basic. For a lot of students that are going into grad school, especially those of people who are going to law school, this is an opportunity for them to get publishing experience. So it's a really useful thing. You can publish an article about a specific policy issue, a specific issue in the legal realm, and you can publish it in an actual journal before you go to law school. This is not, depending on what undergrad program you go to, you can't always do that. So it's really helpful. It's really awesome to be able to work with people, work with potential authors, and also be able to work with my excellent editing team to bring this. It's a really fun thing to be able to do for students going to grad school and law school especially.
I think certainly I would echo what Isaac said about working on the journal. I'm probably not a journalist by trade. I'm definitely much more on the academic side, but it is a good experience.
We all have our parts to play.
Yeah. But as far as being on IFF, I think the most impact that I've certainly received is our political philosophy and film series, which is where we engage the students with either popular or well-respected movies. So, for instance, I think it was only 2 weeks ago we showed The Shawshank Redemption, and talking about, all right, what is the messaging in this film? What social reflections does it offer? And particular to that film, where does the hope it offers? What does that point us to? And so that series, as it's begun this year and as it'll continue into next year, hopefully, has been an opportunity, I think, to look at culture and see, what is it? Both the good and the bad that are in some of our favorite films.
Yeah, really well said. So kind of just moving on, we've been talking throughout this conference about abortion, and one of the points that Abby Johnson, who was the keynote speaker last night, made was that a lot of the people who are having abortions, well, in fact, all of them are our age. Obviously, it's younger people who are in these situations and who are really kind of being seriously impacted by abortion. So with young people being involved, she mentioned how it gives young people a unique opportunity to walk alongside other young people who are maybe struggling or support abortion in a more relatable way. So with that considered, being a young person, what do you guys think is the most effective way to meet other young people that are our peers that maybe fall on the left? What's an effective way to meet them where they are and walk alongside them and share our ideas in effective ways? And whoever wants to start can jump in.
I think Abby Johnson actually made some great points about actually trying to figure out someone's story. I think biblically you can look in Matthew 18 specifically, the biblical model of confrontation, which is mainly just confronting someone one-on-one, mediation, and then going to a higher authority. But I think finding out someone's story, I think she's dead on with that. Rather than shouting out statistics or anything like that, I think it's more meaningful to hear one person's story. Like, this is kind of funny, but the only thing Joseph Stalin, I think, got right was saying that one death is a tragedy, whereas 1 million is a statistic. People don't listen to that weight. You hear there's however many thousands of abortions a year, but I think you hear that and you kind of go, okay, that's just whatever, that's just a number. It doesn't mean anything. But when you actually get down to it with someone and have a true conversation, I think that's a way, I think she's completely right with saying, like, that's how you really help solve the issue.
Yeah, and along those lines, I think in order to understand someone's story, you have to know them. Someone's not going to tell you their story off the street, and if they do, that's great. But I think the more meaningful change is when you seek out relationships. Something that I've been challenged with in my life is one of my best friends from high school. He went through a difficult time our senior year, and now he's changed. He was a Catholic, conservative, and now he is an atheist, liberal, feminist, whatever title you want to title him with. I think he's part of the LGBTQ community now. And he knows where I stand. He knows how I feel about these issues. And it's tough because he wants to push me away as much as possible sometimes. But it's trying to love him for the human being, the imago Dei in him, and knowing that he is struggling and there's something there that's nagging at him, but being a friend to him is what I've been called to do, and if he chooses to open up to me, I have to be there to listen. So it takes a listening ear and friendship with people that aren't exactly like you to understand that.
Can I jump in actually on that? I think too, like you can see that throughout the Bible, even that the greatest of the spiritual gifts, it says the greatest of these is love. Like going along with what he's saying, I think that is so important to remember.
Yeah, the power of story is really something that it is almost impossible to overstate its importance. So the day the Dobbs decision came out, I was outside the Supreme Court, and the fun thing about looking like me is that people generally don't assume you're a conservative when you come up to them. I won't speculate as to why, but I'm sure you can figure that out. But one of the people I talked to, because none of these people have any clue I'm pro-life, right? I'm just a journalist, right? And I'm talking to, probably about my age, a woman who is explaining her position on abortion. And her essential thought was, she's a black woman, and basically she says the whole purpose of the pro-life movement is to put people like you, points at me, and me back in chains. Okay, so this is, there's a blind spot here. And so I asked her, I'm like, do you have any friends who are pro-life who are black? No. That's interesting. And we talked a little bit more about that. It didn't turn into a pro-life debate because that's just not the style of journalism I do. But it's weird because people come into the abortion debate, one, with a lot of vitriol. It's a very, very emotional issue, probably more than any issue in America that's not gun control. And two, people don't understand. A lot of people just don't understand that the pro-life movement is not just a movement of old white men, right? It's not just a movement of old white men. It's a movement of everyday Americans who care about human rights.
And
this is a real thing.
I would say, too, you mentioned being outside of the Supreme Court. I was outside of the Supreme Court when the Dobbs hearings were going on. And not only is it not just old men dominated, it's largely women. You'll see mostly women standing outside, and young people even at the March for Life.
And Democrats, believe it or not.
Yeah, there are pro-choice, exactly. So it's a very diverse movement, certainly.
Yeah, and like diversity is not an argument in and of itself. But when it comes to the power of story, diversity is a winning key. It's important for people to understand if people from every walk of life and every political background and both genders, from every ethnic background, are all raising the same point, there's got to be something there, right? And that, I think, in my experience at least, has been incredibly, incredibly powerful.
Well, I guess I don't have anything more to say. I think certainly the idea of building a relationship with someone and encountering them one-on-one and sort of developing the narrative framework, that is quite essential. I went to public school all throughout primary and secondary education, and so my experience was certainly having a relationship with a lot of the people that I was talking to about this. My best friend from high school was a Trotskyist, so quite a bit of difference between...
How'd that go?
He's a physics major now, so yeah. So the idea of coming to them in love is certainly primary, but to meet young people where they are, so my experience was that so many of my friends in high school were ignorant of the issue, that they knew the talking points. Oh, it's a woman's body, therefore it's her choice. But if you pressed them on what they actually believed. There wasn't any substance to it. And so if you're able to come to them in love, and you have that grounding and that education behind it, oftentimes you may not necessarily convince them of the pro-life position, but you make them aware that the pro-life position is sincere in the very least, if not the morally correct one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just add, because I think it is important, that in my experience, too, it's especially emotional amongst women, and especially young ones on social media. I would, in my experience, abortion is the issue that gains the most emotional heat on social media, as far as commenting mean things or posting and sharing random talking points of my body, my choice. On social media, abortion is the issue that gets the most, I would say, emotion out of people. And in my experience, again, as you were mentioning, there's a lot of people who hear the talking points and who are told, so there's a lot of young women who are told that if abortion was made illegal, that they're losing their rights, that they're not going to be safe medically and whatnot. So these are arguments that we've all heard and debunked many times, but a lot of young women are told that lie and believe it. So I think understanding that, and one of the messages from a lot of the speakers has been to ask people questions, and to ask people questions, ask them, well, why are you pro-choice? Where did you come to that? What's your story? And I think as you guys have explained, that's a really good place to start in just talking to people in your life, young or old, just talking to them and kind of seeing where they're getting their information from, or how they came to the conclusions that they did. But just talking about the pro-life movement, how do you guys think that as pro-life people we can better market to people and reach them where they're at? For example, young people spend a lot of time on things like TikTok, which I'm not a fan of personally. I'm sure a lot of people aren't a fan of TikTok either. But young people spend a lot of their time on it and on other social media. So should we be using that more, and how so?
Yeah, I mean, the answer to the social media question is yes. I mean, this might blow some of your minds, but there's a recent poll that came out that 57% of people in Generation Z get their news almost exclusively from TikTok. Raise your hand if you use TikTok. Yeah. So this is an avenue that the conservative movement needs to look at more, right? Digital messaging is the future. There's no other way around it. I wanted to really quickly go back to something, talking about our strategies as the pro-life movement. It's been weird. We've been at a conference for the past 2 days talking about pro-life issues. Now, I've seen a lot of the Q&As that have happened. Not a single one of them has been, I'm pro-choice, let's talk. So I want to really quickly raise your hand if you would generally consider yourself pro-life. Okay, it's like 100%. And this, for me, has been something that I've noticed in Generation Z pro-life activism sometimes. Thankfully, not really here, but on the internet especially, is this idea that people who, the vast majority, there are extreme fringes of people who are pro-choice, are not stupid and they're not evil. None of them are here today, but that doesn't erase our moral responsibility to remember that the people we are talking about have come to their conclusions through what they believe to be right for women and children. They're wrong, and we should never pretend that their arguments are correct, but remembering that they have come to their positions in what they believe to be good faith is part of this debate. It's not optional to assume the best about people. We have to assume motivations that, for them, make sense and are rooted in what they believe to be goodwill. That's part of love. That doesn't mean we need to agree with them more. We shouldn't, not at all. But it does mean we have to remember that the people we are talking to are coming at this from what they believe to be just and right. That's the only way we're going to make any headway.
I think also, as far as the strategies that the pro-life movement utilizes, we need to write better laws. The amount of pro-life laws that were passed after Dobbs, or were waiting to take effect until Dobbs, was phenomenal. That so many states were ready to capitalize on the momentum, but so many of them were terribly written, when you go through the legal language, there's ambiguity and vagueness, and that's an opportunity for those who disagree with the pro-life movement to launch it up to the radical extreme. If there is a single aspect of the law that is ambiguous, then for the pro-choice movement, it must be the worst case scenario. And that galvanizes people against the pro-life cause. So from my perspective, writing better laws is the responsibility of the current legislatures for pro-life to succeed.
I was reading an article recently, very quickly, talking about how essentially what the fall of Roe v. Wade has done is it has forced conservatives to step off of the thing that we are very, very good at, which is creating opposition, and it has forced us to shift to the thing that we are historically not as good at, which is actually governing and creating sensible policies. And this is the moment for us to shine and do better on that, especially on this issue.
Going back to the social media aspect, I'm genuinely skeptical of the idea that, well, that we can use social media as a platform for these types of issues, not because they're not right or that they would be ineffective, but more because the way that social media and media in general is designed. Recent studies show that Facebook directly targets ads to people to get them angry. It's what they do to keep people on the site. What gets you to keep scrolling and read more? Being angry about something, whether it be Hillary Clinton's pizza shop where she keeps little orphans in her basement, or just other stories that make you think, well, this
Get that reference? You spend too much time on social media.
I became politically aware in 2016. That's all I remember. But the same thing follows for like news and average TV shows that you watch. I mean, I watched a compilation of different news sources saying things that are meant to provoke you to feel anger, sadness, fear, and I don't want to say it's fear-mongering, but I don't have a better word for it. And yeah, along these lines, the pro-life movement should be one of compassion, should be one where we care and reach out. The stereotype that we do not care about people's lives once they leave the womb is one that's been built not on a false stereotype, but one that is in fact a stereotype, because they all have a kernel of truth to them. We need to be outstretched, and I don't think that that's the correct platform for us. Something that makes us feel good. I don't see that as social media or people on media platforms taking to that too well, just from an algorithm or like a like standpoint. But it is always nice to see, the kernel of happiness come across whatever feed I'm scrolling through. So I think that there is some hope, but I'm skeptical of much of that.
Yeah. I think too, like going along with like what the news is and just like the ad hominem that is in the modern news system is horrible. Like, it is pathetic. Like, it's just constant attacks on everybody, left and right attack constantly. There's no, let's hear you out. I think that gives a lot of weight, and I think there's a lot of people, at least in my generation, in our generation, that I think they look at that and they shut off. Like, I think we just turn, like, you see someone who says they're pro-life screaming at somebody, I am now not going to listen to you, even though I agree with you 100%. It just becomes very difficult, at least for me. I don't know if I'm speaking for you, but I have a very hard time watching someone I agree with insult someone else who disagrees. I automatically will be like, I want to take the underdog side. I think a lot of people my age come from that and going like, why are we attacking, if you're pro-life, and that's attacking the innocent, why are you now attacking the innocent? Like, I think it feels very hypocritical to a lot of people my age, so it's this weird cycle, and I think we need to, like, somehow, I mean, I may not know anything.
Yeah,
but.
and I think, I do agree about being skeptical. I think to counter it in a sense is if, with the right motivations, again, being happy warriors in a sense and making sure that, we're carrying ourselves as the pro-life movement in a good way, I do think social media has to be a tool to even get out information, not necessarily to be a tool to fight back and forth, of course, but I think it is somewhere we have to be to get out information, because that's where the other side is. So, I mean, young people will either just hear the other side, or we can have our information flowing there too. But we do want to move into some questions, because we want to give you the opportunity to ask Gen Z voters. We're all Gen Z voters, so we want to give you the opportunity to ask us some questions about anything we've said or just about our generation in general. And we have one over here.
All right, so if you guys, perfect.
Good for you all. I'm just going to start with that. As I was growing up, I believed in the clump of cells thing. I mean, I'm 72. So back then they didn't have everything that they have now. And I learned protesting in Washington, D.C., walking down Independence Avenue, I saw a picture of an aborted baby. And it was not even a blink of an eye that I became pro-life and have fought ever since. While I agree everything has to be done in love, I absolutely, you love them both, women that are pregnant, you love them both, and you need to do that. I also agree, personally, that they need to know what abortion is, because I don't believe they do. I don't believe that they know what happens to a child, to that baby. And I just wonder what you think about that.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that you're completely right, and that's something that changes a lot of people's minds when they do see what an abortion actually is, and what happens during an abortion at the different stages of pregnancy. I think that changes a lot of people's minds and opens their eyes, because I think you're right, a lot of people don't know what abortion is or what it really means. But go ahead, Jake.
Yeah, so in my 10th grade English class, I had to do some sort of persuasive research report, 7-page paper, stuff like that, the things that public school's famous for. And I decided to do mine on eliminating Planned Parenthood. That was the policy that I was going to research. What would it take for Planned Parenthood to lose funding entirely? What do they do? What are their procedures? So for 2.5 months, I got really invested in finding out everything that they're doing. I looked at a bunch of statistics, and towards the end of my research, I found a video of a 38-week abortion, and it was about 5 minutes, and it was really hard to watch. It was terrible. That was the first time that I had seen something like that. And it was quite difficult for me to watch it. I asked, knowing the answer, I asked my teacher if I could share this video as part of my research. And she said no, which I don't think was necessarily a bad idea, because it is something that children should not be watching, because it is so terrible. But at the same time, advocates of the pro-choice position don't know what an abortion looks like.
I think we're all really lucky to be up here. I don't think a single one of us has ever been pro-choice. I may be wrong on that. No? Okay. So, I mean, we're really fortunate. I've never had to watch an abortion. That's pretty much out of my own volition. I can't stomach that. I can't stomach basic blood, let alone that. But there's something in your question that struck me. I'm not sure if you meant it like this, but you kind of pitted education against care and love. I'm not sure you meant it like that. Okay. Well, then I'm going to continue like you did. But but I think love is education. If you did not educate out of love, then our parents would hate us because they sent us here. But if you are educating someone, it is because you love them. Now, you can do education poorly and it comes off like you don't love someone, or you can do it out of malice, and that's a whole different issue. But if you are truly educating someone, that's an act of love, and I would hope our professors agree with it. I don't think they do it out of malice, but to truly educate someone, I think, is to love someone. And so therefore, you can be loving and you can educate. Going out in the streets, I probably wouldn't show a video of an abortion to someone I pulled off the street, but that it would be, for a good cause. But
Well, I'll just add, they do have resources and videos that aren't as graphic that I think should be shown to people on the streets, because that's what changes their mind and has been proven to do so. So, in both sense.
I think, Gregor, you did that.
They did, and Live Action as well, if you've heard of Live Action, does that. And it's proven to be pretty effective if people don't really understand what an abortion is. So.
I think with the education, I think people do need to be educated, but I don't know if necessarily showing a violent abortion is necessarily the right way to go about it, because I think people close themselves off to something. It's hard to like he just said, it's very hard to process as a human being the murder of another human being. That's very hard to witness, and I think in like a history class, you learn about something like the Holocaust. They don't show you videos of them being put in the gas chambers. Like, they couldn't, because you would go, whoa, and then you would just turn off. Like, you just can't process that. I think I don't have really a solution on how to do that another way, a more subtle way. I do think that people do need to be educated. I think we often argue past each other. As a lot of times, I think a lot of pro-lifers go, it's a baby, it's murder. And I think a lot of pro-choicers are like, it's not a baby, it's not murder. And then we kind of go, well, here's numbers. Like, we just go past. We miss each other's argument, thinking we're talking about the same thing. And it ends up this weird, like, well, no one learned anything, because the base level of, is it a human being? Because if it's a human being, they have to admit it's murder. And that's where, like, the argument needs to flow. At least, because if you can't agree on if it's a human being, you're never going to get anywhere on abortion. Because if it's not, then it's not murder. But if it is, then it is. Like, we got to get the terms right for both sides.
Okay, great. We're going to have one last question.
Thank you, and thank you for making your presentation. A couple quick comments first. One of the things, I'm an attorney, and one of the things in legal ethics is to avoid every appearance of impropriety. Attorneys don't always follow those rules, but okay. Secondly, I think a reoccurring theme, which is great, what I'm hearing from you, is the necessity of love. We had a pastor in my church that said, for us to be successful, we have to outlove the liberals. Paul says that, though I have the faith to move mountains, if I have not love, I am nothing. From your perspective as young adults, what are some things in the conservative area that have not been successfully conveyed as love? And how do you fix those?
So we can talk about pro-life stuff, and that's definitely connected to this question. If you want to talk about broader issues, one area that I tend to get more into, you'll have no idea why, is race. I do too. Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. No, brothers at arms, really. In terms of, this is a really interesting question, because a lot of times let's call it a love-first approach, involves really reframing a lot of our talking points. Let's not call them talking points, it's a bad word. But the principle that I've heard articulated by a lot of people is it is not enough to fight against things. We have to be willing to fight for people. So, for example, we'll take the race thing. We'll take reparations right now. Right, there's this big push going on in California to do reparations. It's going to cost the city like $900 billion, and no one's ever going to do it. Right? But the current narrative is, if we don't pass this reparations policy, it's us being hateful towards black people and being unwilling to reconcile with our own racist past. That is not true. But how do conservatives fight against that? Well, we hate reparations because federal spending. What do people hear when you talk about that? Even take it to a broader level, poverty policy. We don't like this poverty policy because we're against federal spending. What do people hear? I care about money. That's what they hear. 100% of the time. And maybe they're wrong, but the onus is on us because we're saying it really, really badly. So in the case of reparations, it's a lot harder to essentially say, no, reparations policies don't work because they don't win for Americans of color. They're not the most effective way to lift Americans of color out of poverty. It's not a win. And the pro-life movement is the exact same way. At the end of the day, we're not just fighting against abortion. We are fighting for women. We are fighting for disenfranchised communities. We are fighting for the poor. We are fighting for all kinds of groups, including the unborn. And we have to use people-first language, because without that, we've got nothing. We've got absolutely nothing. If conservatives could, if I could change one thing about the state of conservative messaging, it would be to take all of the ads that talk about how insert idea here sucks. We'd get rid of them immediately, and we'd start talking about people more. We'd start arguing on behalf of people, on behalf of real Americans who are in need of real change through conservative ideas. On the pro-life side, nowhere is this more true in the pro-life issue. We're fighting for women, we're fighting for children, we're fighting for thousands, millions of ordinary Americans who are not served by the abortion industry. This is exactly right. I think your point is exactly right. It's all about the messaging. It's all about being people first, because these are our fellow Americans, and they're our neighbors, and we're called to love our neighbors and our enemies. That's how it works.
Yeah, and I think too, so just from your question, I think that one of the things I think of is that conservatives are told that their positions are not in love by the left. So the left likes to say to conservatives, any of these positions that you hold are because you're hateful, or because you're racist, or because you don't care about women, or because you fall into any number of those certain camps. So I think that as conservatives, it's important to not falter under that rhetoric and to not affirm that or accept it, because it's not true. And I think off of what Isaac's saying, yes, our messaging is really important, and making sure that our messaging is centered in what we believe and in people and why we care about the policies we're supporting, but it isn't messaging that's reactionary to what the left is saying about us. So if the left says, well, you're pro-life, so you don't care about women, rather than having a reactionary message to that, kind of going about it in the way of, well, I do care about women, and, explaining the positions that we have and why they're loving. Because I do think conservative positions are out of love, but they're largely misunderstood by a lot of people, because the left and the far left, especially those who are politicians in the media and kind of control the narrative that's pushed out. So what more of our peers maybe would hear. So I think, along with what Isaac's saying about making sure that our messaging is good, we have to remember that why we're doing what we're doing, why we care, and stick to that, and not kind of be influenced by what other people are calling us that aren't true. Anything else?
I think we have time for another question, don't we?
I just want to make a statement, man.
Sure.
I'm so glad I listened to you all. I've watched you through the day or so here, and you're more than just smart people. You just go very deep, and it gives me such great hope for the future. And so you're just you're beautiful, and more than just being smart.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks so much.
That was actually a joke. We have time for one more.
Great. Thanks for doing this. It's always fun to get another perspective. I don't know that from listening to you that it applies, because in listening to you, I think I could actually have a rational discussion with you on most any topic.
We gave you the wrong impression then.
All right, so I'm easily fooled. Anyway, I'm curious though. There's so much in literature and in culture about the difference between my generation and yours, for instance, about being a post-truth culture, right? And the fact that, especially from my background in engineering, of wanting to be logical and rational and having an argument and progress, it's more about feelings. How do you see, working within your own generation, the success or not of trying to have discussions that are based on logic or rationale or consistency and things that make sense versus just, well, that's your truth, my feelings?
Well, first off, I think you have to acknowledge people's feelings. I think if we ignore that, then, like we've said, you've lost love for the person. I think that conversation starts out very well by saying, I hear you, I see where you're coming from, and then using any word but to segue into it. If it's a conversation about like relativism, I think the silver bullet to that is really, well, who decided that was the truth? Like, who decided that relativism was the truth? But and I may be misunderstanding your question, if it's more along the lines of someone wants to ignore facts rather than because their emotions, rather than like they just believe that relativism ultimately rules, I think you have to remember that statistics and numbers will only get you so far, but understanding people is better. And I think the most powerful tool is the anecdote. I'm not sure if there's always an anecdote for everything, but just understanding a situation, having a story to tell, is really one of the most powerful tools to starting a dialogue, not just convincing, because convincing shouldn't be the ultimate goal. There are ultimately seeds that we have to plant that the Lord knows what He'll do with them, but we don't.
Yeah, this is really interesting on the Gen Z front, especially. It's been said by conservatives who will remain nameless that facts don't care about your feelings. This is true, but it is also the case, particularly for Gen Z, that people filter facts through their feelings, right? So I think one of the things that's been really successful to me is you actually have to build relationships with people that aren't solely for the purpose of convincing them to your political orthodoxy. And for me, this is not always the most natural thing. Like, oh, I hear you, it's great. Let's talk about these 18 policy positions I have that I would love you to join me on. Right? This is not an effective strategy for reasons that are hopefully obvious. Yeah, relationships matter, especially for Gen Z, really. Gen Z, there are statistics that show that the easiest way to get Gen Z interested in a job is to show them a pathway to promotion, right? What does that mean? What does that imply about Gen Z? Well, it implies that Gen Z is, one, really highly emphasizes relationships. Two, they actually have to believe that you care about them as a person. This has kind of always been the case. It's just very, very pronounced with Gen Z. On the truth thing, yeah, I think you've exactly hit the nail on the head, sir, in terms of we could almost consider our work successful if we could just convince people, leave God aside. If we could convince people the truth was real, that could be a generational win, and we could build on that to something real. This is what Christian artists and screenplay writers and movie producers talk about all the time, is that we have to tell people stories where the truth matters. Turns out stories where the truth matters are the best stories. Whether they're our stories or they're the stories of other people, you have to talk to people about truth. You have to lay the groundwork for truth first. I think this is exactly right. You don't have to go right into God. God might come later. And, if you don't believe in God and you want to believe in God, see us afterwards, please. That'd be great. But you have to lay the groundwork of truth first. Because if you can't figure that out, whether by talking to people about their own lived experiences or by appealing to something higher, and that means we have to understand how people work, you have to lay the groundwork of truth first, because without that, it's going nowhere. And that takes time. And for Gen Z, we're impatient. I'm 21. I don't even know what it's like to live. My dad's 55. I don't understand time in the same way that he does, right? I've been alive for 2 decades, and I'm young and impetuous and arrogant. I don't get that. He does. This takes patience, and especially, it takes patience for Gen Z. But if you're dealing with Gen Z a lot, it takes even more patience. But it'll happen. I have an intense and somewhat baffling optimism that it's possible to make progress on this one.
Yeah, I just quickly to build on that, because I know we want to get to another question before we end. Just quickly, I think it's important to remember and understand Generation Z is constantly bombarded by those feeling sort of ideas, like they on all of the TV they watch, what they hear from their teachers in public school, in the music they're listening to, and everything that you can think of. Generation Z is constantly getting the messaging that's from the secular left. So when we look at them as having their feelings guiding them, that's what they're constantly kind of being emerged in. So I think remembering that, and I kind of think that you have to kind of start from the basics in that sense. And what I mean by that is you kind of have to go back to the foundations of the most, foundational discussions about, well, why do you believe that there are men and women, or why are you a conservative? And going back to those core whys and kind of starting there and building up and out. But also it's important to note that Generation Z doesn't like to be treated like they don't know anything. They don't like to be treated like, oh, they're just in the younger generation, they're always on technology. The most effective way is going to be treating them with respect and, trying to approach it in that way so that you can reach them the best.
Yeah, asking questions is super important. There's this guy named Jesus who did it. They killed him, but it got better. This will be our final question.
So you brought up the Holocaust. I just want to make sure you guys have seen the movie 180. And my real question has to do with TikTok and how our generations understand maybe something like Facebook. But how has TikTok been such a big influence on you? I mean, none of us are even on it probably. And why would the people only get their information from TikTok?
I don't think any of us have TikTok, right? All right. Well, shame on you.
Yeah.
I want to say, as someone who doesn't have TikTok, but at least I have Instagram, the human attention span in America has, over the past 20 years, shortened from about 3 minutes, I think, on a particular subject, to about 40-some seconds.
Less.
Over 20 years that's happened. So, at least for our generation, TikTok and Instagram and Snapchat, it's fast-paced. It's moving pictures on a screen. It has sound and bright colors, and all my friends are on it. Why would I not want to use it? And why would I want to use a newspaper or watch the television for the news or go to an online website where I actually have to read sentences? TikTok allows a quick processing of information, even if that processing isn't done very well, and even if that information isn't very good. So it's a modern drug in many respects that I think the brain is just being wired from a younger and younger age to process that way. If you were at Dr. Truman's talk,
I think too there's also something to be said about like every generation's had their thing that someone's like, that's a bad idea. The telephone came out and everyone was like, that's a horrible idea. Then we got smartphones and we're like, that's a really bad idea. I don't want to get beeps every 5 minutes from someone texting me. Then Facebook came out and everyone kind of freaked out about that. Then you had Vine, which got shut down, but that was only 7 seconds. And now you're at TikTok where everyone, it's kind of like we're kind of, I mean, we're dumb, to be frank, but like, when your parent says don't do something, my first response is, oh, I kind of want to do that. So when you have all your parents and grandparents going, why are you on TikTok? I automatically go, man, kind of want to know what's on TikTok. So I think like constantly criticizing TikTok may not be the right approach to it. Maybe like, but yeah, it is. It's a pure form of entertainment. It's quick 1-minute videos of someone doing really something kind of stupid.
Yeah, one last thing about TikTok, and this is just a generational thing. Raise your hand if you have, this is mostly a non-Generation Z audience, raise your hand if you have ever used social media on a desktop computer or a laptop. If I asked this to a room full of Gen Z kids, there'd be like 2 hands raised. It's because, yeah, exactly, and one of them would be him, right? And this is just a generational thing. I'm on my phone an average of like 3.5 hours a day, right? Oh, the news is also here? Great. Well, I'm not going to go and read an article about it. And for people like me who write articles for money, it really sucks. But, it's just a convenience thing. And it's just a generational thing. And it is going to get worse.
Yeah, and just quickly, I think also part of the problem is it's not only addictive, but again, going back to what's actually on TikTok, it's more of the secular messaging again. And for young people, they're just trying to figure out what their purpose is. They're trying to figure out what life is, what the meaning of life is, what their purpose is. And the problem is, I think there's statistics of a good percentage of Gen Z spends at least an hour on TikTok a day. There's a percentage of Gen Z who is on TikTok constantly, which means constantly scrolling all throughout the day. So understanding that when Gen Z is looking for meaning and they're looking for all of these things and they're spending all this time on TikTok, which is full of the most secular things you can think of, that's obviously going to have very negative impacts. As we've seen, Generation Z has a mental health crisis. And one of the reasons for that is going to be the social media and the amount of time that's spent scrolling on all of these things. So I think understanding that, and just back to we mentioned before, and I'll let Corey say something before we close, but we mentioned before, that's why I think at least, and we kind of maybe disagree up here, that's why I think even though I don't like TikTok, and I know Ben said we shouldn't criticize it, I'm guilty of that. I don't like TikTok and I'll criticize it. But with that considered, for the pro-life movement and for conservative causes, if we're not on TikTok, then we're not reaching all of those young people where they are. And that's just the reality of it, if we like it or not. Young people spend a lot of time on it. It's addictive, it's bad, but what are they seeing on it? And right now, they're seeing largely things that are dominated by the left's messaging. So, no? Okay, well, I guess that means that we'll close. But thank you so much for taking the time to listen to us. I know we've really enjoyed talking to you today and for coming to the event. And you can go to dinner in Rathburn if you're registered at 5:15. Okay, thank you.